I unlocked my front door that evening, scrolling through notifications filled with smiling faces and glittering captions. My breath hitched when I saw the blonde girl holding my handwritten itinerary like it belonged to her. Every comment praised her thoughtfulness, ignoring the midnight hours I spent comparing prices and schedules. I sank onto the couch, whispering congratulations to a room that never answered back or cared. The next photo showcased the harbor restaurant, bathed in sunset gold, exactly as I had planned. My parents raised their glasses in a toast, tagging my brother with affectionate emojis and endless praise. The caption credited his brilliant idea, as though I had simply imagined the countless confirmations. My fingers trembled as I scrolled, each swipe scraping another layer of patience from my bones. I typed a short message, asking why I was never told about the sudden replacement. The reply arrived instantly, accusing me of overreacting and promising I could join another weekend. My jaw clenched because none of them understood how much this moment mattered to me. I worked overtime to afford luxury reservations, yet my name vanished like chalk in rain. Even worse, my mother commented publicly about how refreshing it felt to have new energy. She never mentioned mine, though I carried her burdens like invisible luggage for years. I closed the app as frustration simmered beneath my ribs, heavy and airtight like a balloon. Restless, I walked through my home, noticing subtle traces of intrusion I had ignored before. A throw blanket moved, a coffee mug not mine, faint perfume lingering near the hallway. My brother admitted his girlfriend needed a warm space, since his apartment heater barely worked. Apparently, borrowing my comfort without consent was easier than fixing his own responsibilities. I discovered my spare key missing from the hook, casually explained as convenient for emergencies. The casual tone sliced deeper than any argument, assuming my boundaries were merely decorative. Later that night, I found an online post of her dancing in my living room. She laughed on my grandmother's quilt, captioned with playful hearts about making herself at home. Hundreds admired her carefree charm, while my quiet work was forgotten like furniture in shadow. I asked my brother to return my tools, borrowed months ago without any update. He shrugged, telling me not to be uptight since I never cared before. Apparently, silence had turned into permission, and kindness into a currency they spent freely. I lay awake, tracing the ceiling cracks, realizing how invisible I had become to them. The likes and comments piled up for someone new, while I vanished without ceremony. At 3 a.m., the realization settled like cold dust across my ribs. If they could replace me so easily on a trip I designed, what might come next? My phone buzzed again with another photo, the chair where I was supposed to sit. In that perfect frame, there was an empty corner where my presence used to breathe. I woke the next morning to the sound of footsteps, moving confidently through my hallway. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, but the soft hum of someone else's voice proved me wrong. When I stepped into the kitchen, I found my brother's girlfriend pouring coffee from my favorite mug. She greeted me casually, as if she had always belonged in that space I fought to afford. My brother entered moments later, yawning loudly, thanking her for making breakfast in my home. The smell of my spices drifted through the air, opened without permission or apology. I forced a polite smile, reminding myself that confrontation was not my strongest language yet. She complimented my kitchen layout, touching drawers and opening cabinets like a curious tourist. Every click of a handle felt like another fingerprint pressed into my private world. My brother suggested she stay for a few days, since her apartment plumbing was failing again. Apparently, it was easier to move her here than call a repair service or landlord. By afternoon, I discovered she had rearranged my living room cushions for better, feng shui. She laughed when she said it, telling me my decor was cute but needed personality. Her perfume lingered in every doorway, clinging to curtains like an uninvited guest. I retreated to my office, hopping for quiet, only to find my chair slightly adjusted. My brother had used it late last night to play games on my monitor without asking. When I asked about boundaries, he shrugged, saying family didn't need formal permission. He reminded me how much he loved my generosity, as if praise justified intrusion. Later, I checked the security app and noticed unfamiliar unlock logs on my smart lock. She had entered twice while I was at work, filming videos in perfect lighting. The comments adored her aesthetic, admiring the cozy vibe of her new living space. I watched the clip with numb hands, recognizing my family quilt draped across her shoulders. That quilt held decades of memories, yet she treated it like a prop to collect likes. My stomach twisted when I saw her tagging my brother, claiming she loved their safe haven. She called my house their sanctuary, implying ownership through screens and strangers' compliments. That evening, my father visited and immediately praised her as thoughtful and charming. He never asked how I felt, focusing instead on how well she fit into our dynamic. My mother arrived shortly after, excitedly suggesting the guest room would be perfect for her. I froze as she revealed she had already given her a spare key for convenience. Hearing it aloud stripped something hollow from inside my chest, leaving only quiet disbelief. When I protested, my mother softened her tone, accusing me of being overly sensitive. She insisted that family shared, glossing over how only my resources were ever shared. My brother joked that I should feel honored people loved being in my home. He claimed I was lucky to have space, so it shouldn't matter who used it. Before bed, I noticed my tool set missing from the garage, borrowed without a text or note. When I confronted him again, he rolled his eyes, promising to return them eventually. That night, the house felt smaller, crowded by entitlement rather than bodies or furniture. I lay awake, realizing these violations accumulated quietly like dust on forgotten shelves. If I continued accepting them, my home would become theirs in every way except on paper. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, whispering that the slowest theft was the one politely ignored. I woke up before sunrise, exhaustion poolsing behind my eyes like a warning siren begging for attention. The quiet felt heavy, yet my thoughts were louder than any conversation we never had. I brewed coffee slowly, watching the steam curl upward like unanswered questions in empty air. Something inside me finally whispered that I should measure what I had truly sacrificed. I opened my laptop, hesitating before clicking through folders labeled with years and receipts. The first document was an old lease payment I covered when my brother lost his job. Next was a medical bill insurance wouldn't cover, paid quietly so my father could sleep peacefully. I scrolled further, finding credit card statements from months I barely afforded groceries myself. My hands shook as line after line reminded me of how often I saved them. I never asked for repayment, convinced care was enough to feel useful and loved. Slowly, I built a spreadsheet, typing numbers into columns that felt colder with every keystroke. Mortgage assistance, emergency car repairs, birthday dinners, utility bills during heat waves, each memory carried a price. I remembered quietly canceling plans, just to help when someone needed a last-minute rescue. At some point, responsibility had turned into expectation, and expectation into silent dependency. I stared at the growing total, adding thousands upon thousands without hesitation or gratitude. The sum blinked at me after hours of calculation, a number too large to justify silence. $158,000 and change sat on the screen, undeniable and painful. My throat tightened as I imagined how differently they would treat that sum from a stranger. For strangers, they would sign contracts, send polite thank yous, and respect boundaries like fragile glass. With me, everything was a given, assumed, consumed without acknowledgement of its source. The realization hollowed out a space beneath my ribs that ached like bruised bone. I remembered birthdays, where my gifts became group offerings credited to someone else. I remembered dinners, where I cooked for hours and heard compliments only for the guests. I remembered paying deposit fees, while my brother claimed he found a miracle discount online. Every memory had a transaction attached, emotionally and financially, though none were ever recorded. Guilt tried to creep in, whispering that love shouldn't be measured in spreadsheets or dollars. But I countered silently, thinking boundaries were not the enemy of affection, but the protector. My phone vibrated with another post of my family at a concert I funded unknowingly. Someone commented how generous my brother was to treat our parents for special occasions. I almost laughed, but the sound caught halfway, brittle and exhausted in my throat. My screen reflected my face, tired from carrying a family disguised as tradition and loyalty. I saved the spreadsheet, naming the file something simple: what I gave. The title stung, but truth often stings before it heals the wound beneath. I closed my laptop slowly, feeling a dull throb in the center of my chest. It wasn't just the money. It was years of invisibility dressed up as reliability. I whispered to the empty room that I didn't want to earn love by paying for it. That night, I made a decision, quiet and dangerous as a rising tide in darkness. I would ask for nothing more than respect, and accept nothing less than acknowledgement. As I turned off the lights, the house finally felt honest, and truth echoed in every room. I spent the next morning preparing dinner, chopping vegetables with a focus sharp enough to cut tension. My hands moved automatically, but my mind rehearsed sentences I had swallowed for years quietly. By the time my family arrived, the smell of roasted herbs filled a house that felt borrowed. My mother smiled warmly, placing a salad bowl on the counter as if nothing was wrong. My brother arrived late, offering a lukewarm excuse and a six-pack he would never finish. We sat around the table, clinking utensils and pretending the silence meant comfort or peace. Halfway through dinner, my mother casually mentioned hosting a book club in my sunlit room. My fork stopped midair, hovering like a question no one had bothered to ask properly. She continued praising the natural light, already planning snacks and rearranging my furniture cheerfully. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of crossed boundaries pressing against my ribs painfully. I asked softly if she requested permission, though I already knew the disappointing answer. She blinked in confusion, offended by the idea that she needed to ask anything at all. My father frowned, insisting family should share, as if sharing only applied in one direction. I felt something shift inside me, settling like a beam locking into position firmly. I placed my napkin down slowly, letting the fabric speak the seriousness my voice carried. I told them gently that being family did not grant access to my home without consent. Their faces shifted, twisting from mild surprise into disbelief, tinted with insult and frustration. My brother rolled his eyes, muttering that I used to be fun, not uptight and cold. He complained that generosity should be effortless, like a reflex instead of a conscious decision. I noticed how quickly gratitude evaporated when entitlement felt threatened or challenged unexpectedly. My mother waved her hand, reminding me of everything they had done while raising me. I reminded her calmly that parenting was not a subscription service to lifetime resources. My father's jaw tightened, his voice booming louder, drowning nuance in practiced authority. He accused me of becoming selfish, forgetting the values they proudly imposed upon me. Silence stretched across the table, thinner than glass yet sharp enough to cut deeply. I told them I needed healthy boundaries, not walls, just respect and thoughtful consideration. My brother scoffed, asking if boundaries meant paying rent or moving out suddenly. He had no idea how close his question hovered to the truth beneath my bones. My mother argued that H-letter 1EA1 needed comfort, insisting I should be honored to help her. I reminded her I was tired of being honored for suffering quietly in empty spaces. My father's anger swelled, accusing me of dramatic behavior over trivial household details urgently. I stood up slowly, feeling taller than arguments stacked from countless smaller betrayals. My voice steadied as I explained how intrusion accumulates like dust in forgotten corners. They stared as if they were seeing a stranger, wearing my face and posture. My mother whispered that I was disappointing everyone by changing so suddenly and harshly. I replied that change was overdue, and disappointment was no longer my responsibility solely. The room fell quiet, plates cooling, tension thick enough to taste with each breath. My brother finally muttered that he would return whatever he borrowed eventually someday. I shook my head, saying borrowing without asking was simply taking, dressed politely as favor. I collected stray dishes, letting the running water drown their murmured complaints behind me. Finally, I said clearly that I was done being the silent foundation everyone stood on. My mother's eyes glistened, shocked by the firmness she never expected from me. My father looked wounded, but pride stiffened his posture more than love did. As they left, footsteps echoed down the hall like forgotten promises evaporating quietly. I closed the door gently, heart pounding, realizing honesty feels heavy before feeling free. That night, I stared at the ceiling, whispering to the dark that this was only the beginning. I spent the next day meeting with a colleague from real estate who listened without judgment. He reviewed my situation carefully, explaining I had every legal right to establish formal terms. We drafted a clear rental agreement, not to punish, but to create healthy accountability and balance. Each clause was highlighted to prevent confusion, misunderstandings, or emotional manipulation later on. The monthly rent reflected fair market value, slightly below average for compassion, not guilt. Utilities would be separated, ensuring no one assumed my resources were endless or free. Guests staying more than 2 nights would require written approval, respecting privacy and boundaries. I printed the documents on crisp paper, sliding them into a leather folder intentionally. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar weight of self-respect. That evening, I placed the folder on the kitchen table before my parents entered. They arrived smiling, unaware the room was about to tilt beneath their expectations. My father reached for coffee, but paused when he noticed the formal papers waiting. "What's this?" he asked, tone tightening like a knot pulled too quickly by pride. I explained calmly that since they had lived here rent-free for 5 years, terms were needed. My mother's cup clattered into its saucer, shock trembling through porcelain and fingertips. She asked why I would suddenly change something that had been working perfectly fine. I responded gently that it only worked perfectly for those not carrying the hidden weight. My father flipped through the pages, his cheeks reddening as numbers stared back coldly. He muttered that family doesn't nickel and dime each other, as if accountability was selfish. I reminded him families should not drain one member simply because they always endure quietly. My mother attempted a soft tone, suggesting they pay half to avoid awkward conversations. I shook my head, realizing compromise would only feed the cycle that caged me. My brother wandered in late, asking why everyone looked so dramatic and uncomfortable suddenly. When he skimmed the contract, he laughed nervously, assuming it was a temporary joke. But his smile faded when he saw the signature lines left blank intentionally. He whispered privately that this would cause tension, and I should avoid upsetting them. I answered that boundaries only upset those who benefit from their absence consistently. Later that night, I heard my parents whispering, voices low and wounded in disbelief. They argued quietly about money, pride, and responsibility they had avoided for half a decade. My father mumbled about contributing more when things improved, but nothing had changed in years. My mother defended him gently, ignoring how dependency had become their soft cushion. The next morning, an envelope from an attorney appeared, claiming occupancy rights magically. I forwarded it to my colleague, who replied the claim held no legal foundation whatsoever. He called it a desperate attempt to maintain comfort without sacrifice or ownership. I felt strangely calm reading those words, validation settling like sunlight on cold skin. Later that week, My brother returned, eyes tired, asking if he could crash for a while. He admitted his girlfriend left, complaining he lacked ambition to stand on his own fully. I handed him a list of affordable apartments, already highlighted with application deadlines. He looked betrayed, as if self-reliance was a punishment instead of personal growth. My parents finally signed the agreement reluctantly, avoiding eye contact like guilty children. I placed the signed copies in the folder, feeling the click of closure echo gently. As they left the kitchen, silence followed them, heavy with unfamiliar accountability. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without the weight of unspoken obligations. My dreams felt lighter, shaped by the steady heartbeat of courage blooming quietly. Though tension lingered, I knew boundaries were seeds that grew into healthier futures eventually. As I stared at the signed papers, they reflected not contracts, but my reclaimed identity. I packed my belongings quietly on a rainy Saturday, folding clothes like memories already softened. The apartment across the river smelled faintly of paint, and possibilities still unspoken gently. Concrete floors echoed beneath my steps, sounding like space instead of pressure or expectation. I arranged my books on open shelves, noticing how silence felt like company instead of emptiness. My phone notifications changed instantly, filled with invites from neighbors and coworkers who respected boundaries. No more messages begging for favors, loans, or last-minute rescues wrapped in guilt. I pinned a calendar to the wall, marking pottery classes and photography workshops I once postponed. The simple act of planning for myself felt rebellious and quietly revolutionary. I bought groceries just for me, choosing flavors I liked without compromise or dismissal. The first night alone was peaceful, the hum of the refrigerator sounding like applause. I lit a candle, breathing in lavender instead of the weight of obligation. My parents texted asking why I stopped hosting dinners, confused by the sudden distance. I politely reminded them boundaries require space, not resentment disguised as tradition. They replied with silence, which for once felt like respect instead of punishment. My brother called days later, voice small, asking how to handle his bills alone. I guided him gently, refusing to fix everything, offering advice instead of sacrifice. He sounded frustrated, but I heard independence slowly shaping his words undeniably. At work, my focus returned, numbers making sense again without emotional fog. Coworkers noticed the change, commenting on how I smiled without exhaustion behind my eyes. I joined a photography club, meeting strangers who valued effort instead of entitlement. They complimented my perspective, not my willingness to carry burdens quietly. Weekends filled with markets, coffee shops, laughter, and conversations untainted by expectation. I visited a lakeside cabin alone, taking photos of sunsets like promises kept finally. No one called demanding errands or guilting me for absent loyalty every hour. My social media reflected new memories, not proof of my usefulness to others. One evening, a message pinged from my mother, saying she missed the old version. I typed slowly, explaining she missed the girl who never said no, not me. She responded with a heart, unsure what to say, learning silence can teach gently. Months passed, and my parents learned to pay bills on time without complaint. Their pride softened, shaped by responsibility instead of comfort borrowed freely. My brother found a stable job, discovering independence could be empowering instead of terrifying. He visited my apartment once, eyes widening at how peaceful my space felt truly. He apologized quietly, admitting he never realized how heavy his expectations were before. We talked for hours, rebuilding trust slowly, like mending fabric stitch by careful stitch. Meanwhile, friendships flourished, offering warmth without draining the soul unnoticed. Neighbors dropped by with homemade bread, asking before entering every single time politely. I hosted dinner on my terms, inviting those who valued presence over possession. We toasted to growth, clinking glasses softly against the glow of city lights. Laughter filled the room gently, belonging not borrowed, chosen not demanded. Holidays approached, and invitations arrived, each one weighed with intention and choice. I sent handmade gifts instead of guilt-laced obligation, wrapped in sincerity instead of apology. On Thanksgiving morning, dough clung to my hands like childhood memories warmed. I set a table for 6, none sharing my blood, all sharing my respect completely. A final text came from my mother, nostalgic and unsure how to reach forward. I thanked her for understanding that love requires boundaries, not sacrifice without recognition. She replied, wishing me happiness, at last acknowledging the person I became fully. That night, I pinned a note to the mirror, reminding myself gently but firmly. I owe myself the most, it read, my handwriting steadier than ever before. As candles flickered, I felt whole, no longer furniture in someone else's life quietly. For the first time, my world felt balanced, chosen, and entirely, beautifully mine. The first snow of winter dusted my balcony, settling gently like forgiveness on forgotten wounds. I stood with a warm mug, watching city lights shimmer across the river quietly. My phone buzzed with laughing photos from friends who never asked for anything but presents. I smiled, recognizing how different joy felt when it wasn't earned through sacrifice. A soft message from my mother arrived, thanking me for teaching her about boundaries. She admitted she was still learning, but growth often begins with uncomfortable truths. I replied kindly, offering patience without surrendering the person I fought to become. Closing the conversation, I breathed deeply, unburdened by expectations I no longer carried. Later that night, I passed my old spreadsheet, tucked neatly in a drawer forgotten. The numbers no longer stung, reduced to history instead of anchors around my ankles. I whispered a quiet goodbye to the version of me who survived through compliance. Her endurance built the strength I needed to choose myself without apology finally. As candles flickered along the windowsill, the room felt full without being crowded. I realized family isn't determined by blood alone, but by respect that sustains. Stepping toward bed, I paused, grateful for boundaries that shaped peace instead of loneliness. Tomorrow waited with promise, and for the first time, I walked toward it unafraid.